The surface of Charlotte Winslow's mahogany desk gleamed under the office lights, a reflection of years spent climbing Boston's ruthless marketing ladder. From here, she had commanded multi-million-dollar accounts, steered campaigns that swayed entire industries, and earned a reputation as the woman whose word could tilt markets. Yet today, beneath the polished wood and the aura of power, a different truth pulsed, one she hadn't been ready to face. In her purse, tucked behind a compact and a leather-bound planner, lay the slender plastic wand that had altered her universe. Two faint pink lines, barely there, but undeniable, stared back at her in the bathroom of her corner office. The kind of truth you can't delegate, reschedule, or spin into a press release. She was 34, unmarried, pregnant. The father, Daniel Whitmore, had breezed through her life with the charm and velocity of a corporate takeover. Smooth introductions, bold promises, and a strategic exit the moment things complicated. A venture capitalist with a portfolio of startups and a knack for disappearing. He'd announced a sudden move to Singapore to explore emerging markets. Charlotte had known better. He wasn't chasing opportunity. He was running from commitment. She'd called him once after confirming the pregnancy. There had been a pause on his end of the line, cold, calculated, the kind of silence meant to force you into finishing the sentence for him. He'd finally said, "Handle it like the executive you are." No congratulations. No questions. Just a dismissal dressed as advice. Charlotte had hung up, straightened her Armani blazer, and walked back into her office with a slow realization that the suit felt more like paper armor than power. The Winslow name had weight in Boston's social circles, 4 generations of Protestant propriety and old money composure. Her father, Harrison Winslow, had made millions in commercial real estate. He treated emotions like bad investments, cut your losses early, never let the liability grow. Her mother, Elizabeth, curated their social standing like a military strategist. Charity galas as battlefields, guest lists as tactical maneuvers. It was inevitable that they would find out. The confrontation happened on a Thursday evening in the library of the Beacon Hill townhouse, a room that had absorbed the echoes of her childhood. Her first stumbles across the Persian rug, her teenage arguments that ended not with resolution but with silence. Harrison sat behind his desk, backlit by shelves of leather-bound volumes that seemed to judge as harshly as he did. Elizabeth stood near the window, spine straight, her posture a study in control. "Pregnant," Harrison repeated, tasting the word like something spoiled. "And not even married. Not even the courtesy of an engagement." His voice was the same one he used to announce disappointing quarterly results, sharp, sterile, final. 40 years of building a name worth respect, and you undo it with one reckless choice. Elizabeth's words came coated in honey, but cut just as deep. "Have you considered the gossip? The Weatherbys, the Cabots, they will talk. Discreet options exist, Charlotte. Switzerland, perhaps. We can tell people you're researching European markets." Her fingers toyed with her pearl necklace, a nervous tell she'd never admit to. Charlotte felt something inside her give way, not loudly, but with the quiet inevitability of a rope fraying under too much weight. She met their eyes in turn. "I'm keeping the baby," she said, her voice steadier than her heartbeat. "With or without your support." Her father's reply came like a surgeon's scalpel, swift and merciless. "Then you'll have neither the Winslow name nor its resources. You are no longer my daughter. The trust fund is closed. The accounts are frozen. The car, the apartment, all of it gone." Security was summoned before she had the chance to answer. By the next morning, Charlotte's penthouse, her sanctuary high above the city, felt like someone else's life. She packed 3 suitcases. Everything else, artwork, designer furniture, the symbols of her status, was to remain. Her Mercedes was towed before she could lock the front door. The company credit cards were canceled. 12 hours earlier, she'd been a CEO with an empire. Now she was a woman with 3 suitcases and a pregnancy she carried alone. The place she landed next was a far cry from Beacon Hill's manicured streets. The Dorchester Transitional Housing Complex smelled faintly of disinfectant and weary resignation. Its stairwells were worn smooth by years of other people's downfalls. Charlotte wrestled her luggage up 3 flights, her heels clicking against the concrete in defiance of the setting. That was when she heard a voice behind her. "Need a hand?" She turned to see a man in a janitor's uniform, mid-30s, skin the warm shade of summer bronze, dark eyes calm and watchful. He didn't move toward her, just waited for her answer. "I'm fine," she started, but the protest crumbled under the weight of exhaustion and lingering nausea. "Let me help," he said simply, already lifting her heaviest bag as though it weighed nothing. She followed him down the hallway to Unit 307. From another doorway, a little girl with braided hair and pajamas covered in astronauts peeked out. "Daddy, who's the sad lady?" she asked with innocent bluntness. "This is our new neighbor," the man said. "Her name's Charlotte. We're in 305 if you need anything." Charlotte managed a nod, the words "thank you" tasting strange after years of taking help for granted. When the door closed behind her, she stood in the middle of the small beige apartment. No art, no view, no silence, only the muffled hum of televisions and the creak of footsteps overhead. For the first time in years, Charlotte Winslow was truly on her own. Charlotte had imagined the sound of losing everything would be loud, doors slamming, voices raised, footsteps storming away. In reality, it was eerily quiet. A final signature on a bank document, a click as a phone call ended, the muted thud of her father's study door closing. By the time she arrived at the penthouse that evening, the unraveling was already complete. The building's doorman avoided eye contact, clearly instructed not to assist her. Inside, her assistant's name had been removed from the intercom list. A courier from the bank arrived with 2 envelopes, one containing a formal notice about the trust's dissolution, the other holding the last paper statements from her accounts, numbers slashed to zeros with mechanical precision. Her driver had been reassigned to other duties. The Mercedes vanished from the garage without so much as a goodbye squeal of tires. She had, for the first time in a decade, to call a taxi. Packing was an exercise in tria. She moved from room to room, scanning possessions for the answer to a cruel equation. What will fit, and what can I bear to leave behind? Her designer wardrobe was compressed into garment bags. Framed degrees were wrapped in towels to avoid breaking. A small silver locket, her grandmother's, was slipped into a side pocket of her purse. The rest stayed. By morning, the building's concierge was instructed to treat her like a former resident. The elevator ride down with her 3 suitcases felt like a descent into exile. The address her caseworker gave her, Dorchester Transitional Housing, sounded sterile and forgettable. It was exactly that, a squat brick structure wedged between a pawn shop and a laundromat, its facade offering no hint of welcome. The air inside carried a faint tang of bleach, the kind that spoke of constant cleaning rather than true freshness. Her assigned unit, 307, was small and bare. The windows overlooked an alley. The bed sagged in the middle. The walls were painted an indifferent beige, as if daring her to care about them. She placed her suitcases in the corner and sat down, the mattress squeaking under her weight. That's when she heard the knock. Opening the door, she found the same man who'd carried her bag earlier. "Marcus," he said, offering a small nod. "Just checking you got settled." "I'm fine," she replied, though she wasn't. His gaze flicked briefly around the room, noting the unopened bags, the way she perched on the edge of the bed like a guest. "If you need anything, tools, light bulbs, whatever, just holler." From behind him came the sound of small feet padding across the hall. The little girl with the astronaut pajamas appeared again, hair now loose around her shoulders. "I'm Sophia," she announced. "Daddy says you're new. You look like you need cookies." Marcus smiled faintly. "She's very free with other people's kitchens." Charlotte felt the corner of her mouth twitch, the closest she'd come to a smile in days. "Cookies sound nice." They left her with a paper plate stacked high with oatmeal raisin, still warm enough to scent the air. She ate them alone, staring out at the alley, wondering how a life could compress so quickly from skyscrapers to 4 beige walls. 3 days later, her carefully maintained facade cracked. She'd been wearing her most conservative suit for another job interview, determined to project competence. The nausea hit halfway down the hallway, compounded by an entire day of not eating. The next thing she knew, She was waking on a couch that smelled faintly of lavender, a cool cloth against her forehead. Marcus's apartment was different from hers, cluttered in a lived-in way. Drawings were taped to the fridge. A photo of a smiling woman sat on a shelf, her arm around Marcus's shoulder, the same dark eyes shining. Sophia sat cross-legged on the floor with crayons spread like a rainbow explosion. "You fainted like in my fairy tale book," Sophia said without looking up. "But Daddy says you're just tired from growing a baby. That's hard work." Charlotte blinked. "You know." Sophia shrugged, as if babies were no stranger than cookies. "It's obvious." Marcus appeared from the kitchen with a tray. "Soup. Nothing fancy, but it'll help." She sat up, the bowl warm in her hands. The first spoonful felt like a truce, between her pride and her need. "I should go," she said after a few bites. "I've imposed enough." "You haven't," Marcus replied evenly. "When was the last time you ate a proper meal?" The question slipped past her defenses. Her throat tightened, and before she could stop them, tears blurred her vision. She told them, more than she told anyone, about the pregnancy, the man who'd vanished, the family who'd cast her out, the career that had evaporated overnight. Marcus listened without interrupting, only refilling her water when the glass ran low. When she finally fell silent, Sophia piped up. "My mommy lives in the stars now. Daddy says she watches us. Maybe she sent you because you need watching too." Marcus's face softened at the mention of the woman in the photograph. "Maria always looked out for people," he murmured. He set down his mug and met Charlotte's gaze. "The room next to Sophia's is empty. Used to be my office. If you need somewhere, it's yours. No strings." Charlotte's first instinct was to refuse, to cling to the illusion of self-sufficiency. But illusions don't pay rent, and pride doesn't feed a baby. "I'll pay once I find work," she said. "We'll figure it out," Marcus answered, as if the matter were settled. That night, she moved her suitcases into the small room. Sophia made a welcome sign covered in sunflowers and smiley faces, taping it proudly to the door. For the first time since the fall, Charlotte slept without the constant thrum of panic. The rhythm of Marcus Rivera's apartment was nothing like the world Charlotte had left behind. Morning began not with the shrill urgency of an alarm, but with the cheerful chaos of Sophia preparing for school, singing to herself in the bathroom, mismatched socks dangling from her hands, chattering about planets or playground politics. Marcus moved quietly in the background, scrambling eggs, braiding hair, and packing lunches with a competence born not from perfectionism but necessity. Charlotte would emerge from the small spare room to the smell of coffee and the sound of laughter, two things she hadn't associated with mornings in years. "You were a CEO?" Sophia asked one morning, pronouncing each letter like it was part of a secret code. "Yes," Charlotte replied, buttering toast with a clumsy domesticity she was still getting used to. "It means I was in charge of a big company. I told a lot of people what to do." Sophia thought about that seriously. "Like when I'm line leader at school?" "Something like that," Charlotte said, amused. "Miss Peterson says a good leader helps everyone get where they're going," Sophia added, clearly proud of her role. The child's words stayed with Charlotte long after the school bus pulled away. In her former world, leadership had meant control, strategy, and advantage. She'd never considered it might mean something as simple and as difficult as helping people arrive where they needed to be. Marcus never mentioned the irony of working nights in the same kind of office towers Charlotte once ruled from. He would leave after Sophia's bedtime, his uniform clean but worn, returning just in time to walk her to school in the morning. His life revolved entirely around that little girl. Charlotte began helping with homework in the evenings. To her surprise, she was good at it. Explaining multiplication to a second grader required a kind of patience she'd never had in boardrooms. "You'd make a good teacher," Marcus said one night, watching her use Sophia's toy blocks to demonstrate fractions. Charlotte laughed. "Teaching requires more patience than I possess." "People change," Marcus replied simply, his gaze holding hers for a beat longer than necessary before returning to the dishes. It was in bits and pieces, often in the quiet moments, that Charlotte learned about Maria. Maria had been a nurse, quick to smile, quick to argue when she thought she was right. She'd met Marcus in the emergency room after he'd injured his hand on a construction job. 2 years later, they were married, and Sophia arrived soon after. Then came the accident. Maria driving home after a 12-hour shift, a drunk driver running a red light. Instant. Final. Marcus had been teaching Sophia to tie her shoes when the police knocked. "I was supposed to be an engineer," Marcus said one night when Sophia was asleep. They sat at the kitchen table, a pot of tea between them. Had a good job lined up. But after Maria, Sophia needed me more than the career did. Charlotte felt something in her chest tighten. She'd lost things, money, status, the illusion of security. But Marcus had lost the center of his world and rebuilt his life around someone else's needs without complaint. "You are somebody," she told him quietly. The most important somebody to Sophia. His mouth curved into the smallest of smiles. Maria used to say that. Weeks passed, each day pulling Charlotte further from the life she'd once lived. She applied for jobs, her resume growing increasingly creative to gloss over the gap. The marketing world that had once courted her now viewed her as damaged goods. Eventually, she found part-time work at a small nonprofit. The pay was modest, less than her old car payment, but it came with insurance and a sense of purpose she hadn't expected. Sophia became her unofficial pregnancy companion, devouring library books about fetal development. "At 16 weeks, your baby is the size of an avocado," she announced one morning over breakfast. "And it can hear things now, so we should play nice music so it comes out happy." Charlotte laughed, really laughed, and realized it was the first time in years the sound hadn't felt like an act. Evenings often ended with Marcus and Charlotte in the kitchen, cooking together. She learned his recipes, soups and stews that favored nutrition over presentation, and began to see the value in meals made to feed, not impress. Life here was smaller, simpler. Yet each day, she found herself breathing more easily. She was no longer Charlotte Winslow, Boston's marketing queen. She was simply Charlotte, neighbor, tenant, soon-to-be mother, and unexpectedly friend. The phone call came on a rainy Thursday, the kind of day when the clouds sit low and the streets glisten like spilled ink. Charlotte had just returned from the nonprofit's cramped office, her umbrella dripping in the doorway, when the landline in Marcus's kitchen rang. She almost didn't answer. No one ever called for her here. "Charlotte," her mother's voice said, crisp and deliberate, as if each word had been ironed before speaking. "Your father doesn't know I'm calling." Charlotte straightened instinctively, her free hand resting over the swell of her belly. "We are prepared to discuss terms for your return," Elizabeth continued without preamble. Charlotte's pulse quickened, but not with excitement. "What kind of terms?" she asked, though she already sensed the shape of the trap. "You will place the child for adoption," her mother said, her tone as matter-of-fact as if she were suggesting a change of shoes. "Privately, through the appropriate channels. Then you will spend 6 months in our property in Switzerland, officially conducting market research. When you return, we will reintegrate you gradually. Your father has agreed to this compromise." Charlotte stared out the rain-streaked window, the words sinking in like stones. Switzerland. Reintegration. A clean, well-lit erasure of her pregnancy. It would be so easy to say yes. To slip back into the familiar world of Beacon Hill dinner parties, first-class travel, and the Winslow name opening every door. But all it would cost was the life growing inside her. "No," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "This child isn't a mistake to be erased. If being a Winslow means sacrificing my baby for social standing, then I'm grateful not to be one." A long silence followed, her mother's breathing faint on the other end. "You've always been stubborn," Elizabeth said finally. "I suppose some traits breed true, regardless of circumstances. Your father will not change his mind. This is your only chance." "Then my answer remains no. I'm building a different life now, one where love matters more than lineage." The click of the disconnect was soft but final. Charlotte sat on the edge of her bed for a long time afterward, the rain whispering against the window. It wasn't just a rejection of their offer. It was the closing of a door she'd once thought she could wedge open again. When Marcus returned from work that night, she was still sitting there, the room dim except for the glow of the streetlight outside. He didn't ask what had happened. He just sat beside her, his presence steady and undemanding. A few minutes later, Sophia padded in, climbing onto the bed and curling against Charlotte's side. "The baby's doing somersaults," Sophia said with a grin. "It must be happy. Babies know when they're loved." Charlotte looked down at the little girl pressed against her, then over at Marcus, who gave her a quiet nod. "Yes," she said softly, resting a hand on her belly. "This baby is definitely loved." The labor started on an ordinary Tuesday morning, 3 weeks early. Charlotte had been helping Sophia practice for her spelling bee when the first contraction gripped her, sharp enough to make her gasp. She told herself it was false labor, but when her water broke while making lunch, denial was no longer possible. Sophia, practical as always, ran next door to Mrs. Chun. The elderly woman, who had once been a midwife, took one look at Charlotte and announced, "Hospital." Now, by the time Marcus arrived, breathless from running straight from work, Charlotte was already in the throes of transition. "I'm here," he said simply, taking her hand as another contraction built. "You're not alone." Hours blurred into a rhythm of pain and purpose. Marcus stayed beside her, offering ice chips, murmured encouragement, and the occasional terrible joke to keep her anchored. Sophia waited in the family lounge, coloring a picture for the baby, with fierce concentration. When the wailing bundle finally landed on Charlotte's chest, slick and perfect and furious at the world, she felt her entire life rearrange itself in an instant. "David Harrison Montgomery," she whispered, the name tasting right on her tongue. "He's beautiful," Marcus said, his eyes bright. Sophia tiptoed in later, holding a glitter-covered card. "Can I be his big sister? I could teach him things." Charlotte smiled through her exhaustion. "I think he'd be very lucky to have you as his big sister." Back at the apartment, life shifted again. The small room that had once held only her suitcases now held a crib, a changing table, and the steady rhythm of newborn cries. Marcus and Sophia became her support crew, bringing meals, holding David so she could shower, rocking him when her arms were too tired to lift. What had once felt like a stopgap shelter now felt like a sanctuary. One night, as David slept in Marcus's arms, he said, "There's a medical coding program at the community college. Flexible hours, decent pay. With your attention to detail, you'd be good at it." Charlotte studied him, wondering if he realized how much his belief in her had changed her. "I'll look into it. Thank you for thinking of me." "Always," he said, simple but weighted. And for the first time in months, she let herself believe in a future she could choose, even if it wasn't the one she'd once imagined. David was 4 months old when Charlotte finally exhaled. The nights were still broken into 2-hour stretches, the laundry seemed endless, and her days revolved around feedings, diaper changes, and keeping the tiny human in her care alive and comfortable. But the panic that had gripped her after his birth had faded, replaced by a quiet confidence. She knew his cries now, the hungry one, the tired one, the pick-me-up whimper. She could soothe him with a hum, rock him to sleep without thinking, change a diaper in the dark like a seasoned veteran. Life had a new rhythm. Mornings began with Sophia bounding into her room to greet her baby brother, who beamed at the sound of her voice. Marcus brewed coffee while Charlotte fed David, their conversations a mix of grocery lists, neighborhood gossip, and small victories, David rolling over, Sophia getting a gold star at school. In the afternoons, she studied. Marcus had been right. Medical coding suited her. It was precise, organized, demanding in a way that felt satisfying rather than exhausting. While David napped in the stroller beside her, she annotated textbooks, memorized procedures, and completed online modules at the kitchen table. Marcus watched David during her online exams, pacing the apartment with the baby in his arms, humming quietly. Charlotte would look up from her laptop to find him swaying in the doorway, eyes on the child as if he were the most important thing in the room. Spring brought warmth and, with it, small shifts in the air between them. Passing David back and forth meant their hands touched more often. Shared laughter over Sophia's antics lingered a little longer. "You could be more than this," Charlotte said one evening, watching him repair Mrs. Chen's toaster with the precision of an engineer. Marcus didn't look up. Maybe. But I mop those floors so Sophia has health insurance, so she knows I'll be home every morning. That's not wasted. That's choice. Charlotte absorbed his words in silence. He had a way of cutting straight to the truth without making her feel small for missing it. The day her certification email arrived, she printed it immediately, the paper still warm when she showed Marcus. Medical coding specialist, she read aloud, grinning. Officially qualified. He broke into a genuine smile. I knew you could do it. We're celebrating tonight. That evening, they sat on the fire escape with a bottle of wine Marcus had been saving. The city glittered around them, the hum of traffic a low background song. I never thank you properly, Charlotte said, the wine lending her courage. For taking me in. For everything. You don't owe me thanks, he said simply. You've given as much as you've received. Sophia's happier than she's been in years. Something shifted then, small but undeniable. She leaned forward. He met her halfway. The kiss was gentle, steady, and warm, the kind that didn't promise perfection, just possibility. I'm not good at relationships, she admitted when they parted. Good thing I'm patient, Marcus replied. David's first birthday arrived in a blur of sunshine and paper decorations. Sophia had insisted on inviting everyone in the building, and the apartment seemed to expand to fit the crowd. Mrs. Chun brought dumplings. The neighbors filled tables with food. Charlotte watched David's chubby fist smash into his cake, his squeal of delight cutting through the hum of conversation. A year ago, she'd been alone and terrified, standing in a beige-walled room with 3 suitcases and nowhere to go. Now, she stood in the middle of something far richer than anything her family's money had ever bought. Marcus slid an arm around her waist. Happy, he asked quietly. She thought of her father's version of happiness, measured in property, influence, and reputation, and realized how small it seemed now. Yes, she said and meant it. Happier than I ever thought possible. That night, after the guests had gone, the 4 of them curled on the couch. David slept in Charlotte's arms. Sophia leaned against Marcus, her eyes already closing. Tell us a story, Daddy, Sophia murmured. Marcus smiled. Once upon a time, there was a princess who thought she needed a castle to be happy. But she learned that home wasn't about the size of the castle. It was about who was inside it with you. Charlotte listened, a smile tugging at her mouth. She'd been that princess once. She'd lost the castle, but somewhere along the way, she'd found the home she hadn't even known she needed. David stirred, and she adjusted him gently, feeling the warm weight of him against her. Every choice, every sacrifice had led here to this couch, this child, this family that had grown out of kindness rather than blood. Maybe happily ever after wasn't a guarantee, but she knew they would choose happiness together, one day at a time. And that, she thought, was worth more than any crown.